casting couch? That's the second half of this interview. The first half is why filmmaker Peter Bogdanovich was on Later with Bob Costas 34 years ago tonight, October 1st, 1990. He was promoting his new film, the second of his adaptations of Larry McMurtry's novels, the first being The Last Picture Show. But his film Texasville was being released that week, and he was making the promotional rounds. Our man, Bob Costas, pointing out that you don't do this to ladies. Went down the road of Bogdanovich's use of starlets. You can figure this out, especially these days. You know, this should make a bunch of people's heads explode.
Thanks for staying up later. Peter Bogdanovich joins us tonight for the first of two programs, and during the next couple of evenings, we'll have an opportunity to talk about some of the pictures he's made and what's upcoming in his career, as well as some of the incidents which he has been involved in through the years as a filmmaker. Texasville is to be released this weekend, a sequel to The Last Picture Show. Other than the obvious, the fact that The Last Picture Show was tremendously successful, received 8 Oscar nominations, what sparks the idea for the sequel?
Oh, well, Larry McMurtry, the fellow that wrote the Last Picture Show, the novel, was kind of threatening to write a sequel to Picture Show for years. And he finally did. He wrote a novel. I believe it came out in '87, which had several of the same characters. And it was a big, long book, 500 and some pages. But it just seemed, how could I not do it? It had wonderful characters, wonderful dialogue. Larry writes the best dialogue anybody in his generation, my generation. And it just seemed like a way to revisit those characters and also part of my own life. And I think all of us felt that way. Jeff and Sybil and Cloris Leachman, Randy Quaid, everybody who came back, Eileen Brennan, Tim Bottoms. I think we all felt it was a way to revisit something that we'd all worked on, that we were all proud of, and 20 years later, you know, it's very rare to get that kind of opportunity. So how can we say, no, we don't want to do that? It just seemed like, I mean, if it hadn't been a good book, we wouldn't have done it, but it's such a good material.
Circumstances obviously have changed over 20 years. How do we find these people? Where do we find them? Same place, scattered around the country?
No, it all takes place in the same small town in Texas, and we went back to the same place, which was actually Larry McMurtry's hometown. The first picture was set in the early 50s, 51, 52. This one is set in 1984. So it's really over 30 years later in the lives of the characters, although it's only 20 years since we made the picture. However, those difference of those 10, 12 years, the actors had to age more. They had to be older than they are to play the roles, because Jeff is supposed to be pushing 50, and so is Sybil, and they're not. They're a good 10 years younger. So anyway, all the characters are still in the same hometown. Jeff Bridges is now an oil man. He got very successful in the boom and then lost it all, and is now, as the picture starts, he's $12 million in debt. He's married. His marriage is shaky. He's got several children, including 2 10-year-old twins, and he's got 2 very young grandchildren. And he's going through a midlife crisis. And at that moment in time, JC, his ex-girlfriend, high school sweetheart, CYBILL Shepherd, comes back to town to basically to recover from a tragedy in her life. Her young child was killed in an accident about a year before the picture starts. And that kind of triangle between Jeff, Sybil, and Jeff's wife in the picture, played by Annie Potts, is the focal point, although really it tells the story of all the principal characters. And Tim Bottoms has his problems, and he seems to be losing his mind. Cloris still loves him. It's got a lot of reverberations from the first picture, but you don't have to have seen the first picture, I think, in order to appreciate this.
Oh, really?
No.
The last picture show was a nearly perfect evocation of a time and place, a mood,
Thank you.
the feeling. It wasn't incidental that it was done in black and white, but everything about it, the dialogue, the relationships between the characters seemed at least to suggest perfectly that time and place. Now, as we move to 1984, because of the nature of communication and the way the country changed, even a tiny town in Texas is less isolated and less specific in 1984 than it was in 1951. Can you capture as much of a particular feeling, therefore?
Well, it's you know, it's a different feel. I mean, the picture is not a remake. It really is a sequel. It's really is 30 years later, and everything's different. Sure, and the picture's in color, which gives you a whole different look to begin with. Now, the thing is that the town really hadn't changed much. The real town, it did. They did have a lot of money for a while, and by the time we got there, they'd already were lost it, and still hanging on. But there was a lot of similarities in the way the town was, but of course the world had changed around it. And since the people that we're dealing with were still stuck in that town, it's a kind of a dichotomy. They're different, but they're in many ways the same. It's strange. You have to see the picture, really.
One of your most popular films, obviously, is Paper Moon. Yeah. How difficult was it to direct a young Tatum O'Neal?
Well, you know, it was a tremendous challenge, and it was only my fourth picture, and at the time, gee, I thought this was hard. After having done a few pictures and worked with some non-8-year-olds, maybe much older than 8, who were much more difficult, I'd say it was not that tough.
Some of your best appreciated work has elements of sentimentality in it. In the end, Ryan and Tatum O'Neal are reunited on the dusty road, and they say, we'll set out over life's highway together. And until the end, you don't know if that's the way it's going to work out, and that sends the people out happy.
Yes. I felt that was an ambiguous ending. I always felt that was a somewhat ambiguous ending, because although she wants to be with him because he is her father, and the audience kind of wants them to be together too, when you analyze it, probably is the worst thing that could happen to her is to be with him, because he doesn't really change that much from beginning to end. He's still not a great guy.
Still a con man.
Still a con man, and still doesn't want to admit that she's his daughter. But the point of that, I suppose, is that I don't like sentimentality in pictures, or mawkish sentimentality. I don't like, you know, hearts and flowers, but sentiment is what it's all about. And to be able to make an audience laugh and cry in the same movie, that, to me, that's what I like to do, and that's what I like to have done to me as a viewer.
It's interesting how you got to make your first film. You'd worked with Roger Corman, who was here recently and influenced the careers of so many later prominent directors and actors, and then he gave you a shot at doing your first feature. How did it happen?
Roger's an amazing person, and wonderful, important figure in the last 20, 30 years of movies. I had worked with him on a picture called The Wild Angels, and I'd done some second unit and so on, and he wanted to give me a chance, so he told me that Boris Karloff owed him 2 days' work, and he suggested that I take those 2 days with Karloff and shoot about 20 minutes of film, and use a few other actors, and then take about 20 minutes of footage from another film that Roger had made with Karloff, take some Karloff footage out of that, and that would give me 20 minutes of Karloff, 40 minutes of Karloff, and then I was to shoot with some other actors for another 40 minutes, and he could release a new Karloff picture.
The ever-resourceful Corman.
Yes, you get the picture. So, he said, would you be interested in doing it? Well, you know, hadn't directed my own picture, so I said, yeah. And I didn't have to use all that footage from the other picture and so on. And we made a kind of an interesting movie about an old-time horror movie star who finds that the horror of real life is beyond anything that he could play in a Victorian horror picture, and so he wants to quit pictures. And this is cross-cut with a story of a young man from Los Angeles who goes crazy and becomes a sniper and starts killing people. And we cross-cut the two stories. Well, Roger liked that, and that's what happened. The whole thing came about as a result of the limitation that was placed in front of me. And I think a lot of good things come out of, you know, limitation. You're limited to this, this, and this. What are you going to do with it? Well, let's think, you know, and I think that's valuable. It's in a way more inspiring than saying, look, I'll give you $50 million. You want to make movies? Gee, suddenly you can do anything. You don't know what to do. But if you're limited, you say, okay, well, I got to do something based on these things. Let's see what I can do.
You have been portrayed in many articles and in a couple of movies in a very unfavorable light. One obvious characterization was the Svengali thing, where an 18, 19-year-old CYBILL Shepherd is selected to play a key role in the last picture show. Then the two of you wind up romantically linked for a long period of time. Youthful Dorothy Stratton put into the picture. They all laughed. I don't even know if that can be called a charge, because I'm not aware that it's illegal. But was that a fair thing to say? Is it fair to say that you mixed romance with business too much and therefore made inappropriate artistic judgments?
Well, you know, there's an awful lot of precedence for directors becoming involved with women that they are photographing. It's somewhat of an occupational hazard in some ways. It's not only in movies but in the theater. However, the accusation that I'm a Svengali and that these ingenues are mere you know, marionettes in my hand or any of that, that's really a bigger insult to the women than it is to me. And I think it partially comes, the impulse to say that is an insult to the women more than to me. I mean, it's just irritating to me because it's inaccurate. To the women, it must be infuriating because it just implies that they have no personality, no talent, no nothing, and it's just Peter pulling the strings. Well, this is grossly inaccurate and unfair to the women. My mother was a very, very strong woman. And she had me, I was born when she was about 21 or 22. So the first strong woman in my life was about 21 or 22 years old when I first met her. And that may be psychologically something in my mind, but the point is that I haven't known weak or dingbat ingenues in my life. 22, 23-year-old women can be extremely strong, full of intelligence and wisdom. And in many cases, perhaps they haven't been as beat up as people who are somewhat older, and so that their instincts and their talent is more accessible to them. So
it's obvious that CYBILL Shepherd, CYBILL Shepherd had talent. She's done a lot of good work. At the time, though, that she was cast in Daisy Miller, for example, people were saying, you know, here's a guy who's achieved a position of significance. He's got power, and now he's letting the personal bleed over into the professional, and otherwise this casting decision would never have been made.
But you see, that's ignorance, because Daisy Miller character was very much like CYBILL. She was a kind of an East Coast girl, or CYBILL's from Memphis, but she was from Schenectady or something. 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old girl, chatterbox, not intellectual. And this isn't the way CYBILL is, but it was certainly something she could play. Mm-hmm. What people thought was that Daisy Miller, because it's set in Europe, that she has to be some sophisticated European thing, and that CYBILL's very guilelessness was absolutely wrong for the part. But I must say, in our defense, that two of the most eminent Henry James scholars in the world, Gore Vidal and Leon Edel, have gone on record saying it's the best picturization of Henry Miller ever been done.
People wonder about your relationship with Dorothy Stratton, not about the part that should remain private, but they wonder why you would write a book about her life and your relationship with her after she had been murdered and after that situation had been talked about for 3 or 4 years, and then in the mid-'80s out comes this book. What was your motivation for doing that?
Bob, a murder is a cataclysmic event. It's so sudden and so final that the shock of it, simply the shock, is a difficult thing to deal with and to get over. You know? It's like somebody drops an A-bomb at your feet and somehow it goes off and you live. And I didn't feel I could go on with my life in the state that I was without in some way trying to understand what had happened. So the book, you could say, was a kind of therapeutic attempt to understand what had happened. I mean, I did a lot of research. I didn't just sit down and write the book. I read an awful lot of stuff. And I talked to an awful lot of people to try to find out what had happened and why it had happened. And that spun me off into a lot of areas. And so for 3 or 4 years, that's what I was doing. And I just couldn't think of making a picture or doing anything else until I felt I had a handle on this and that I could deal with it. And deal with it meant looking it right in the face.
Let me jump in because I might have assumed too much. For those who don't know, Dorothy Stratton had been a Playboy centerfold, then became involved in a motion picture called They All Laughed and was romantically involved with Peter Bogdanovich. Her estranged husband murdered her, obviously in a jealous rage, and then committed suicide himself. There were subsequently 2 movies made about it. One was called, I believe, Death of a Centerfold. It was a television movie, and the other was the Bob Fosse movie, Star 80, which featured Mariel Hemingway as Dorothy Stratton. Had those movies, in your mind, done a fair job of depicting Dorothy Stratton's life? Do you think you could have gone on, or was the book necessary as an answer? Well,
you know, the book was... I started writing the book before those films came out, although they were announced while I was working on the book. That was the other thing I was going to say to you, Bob. Nothing I read or saw came even remotely close to what she was like. Nor did they get the facts even remotely, not even in the same ballpark. It was so far off on every level that I suppose if I'd waited and just seen those films, maybe that would have pushed me into writing it. But I just knew that they couldn't possibly know the story because I didn't know it and I was involved in it. So if I didn't know it, how could they? I said that to Fosse when he told me he was doing it. And I said, but you don't know that? He said, it's a good story. I said, you don't know the story. And I saw the picture and he didn't know the story. And now, I don't say that I had the whole story right either, because since the book was published in '84 and then paperback '85, many things have come to light, things I've understood better about her, about the situation, and probably I would write the book differently now.
Time for us to say goodnight. Our thanks to Peter Bogdanovich, and we'll see you later.
Join us tomorrow when Peter Bogdanovich returns.